So welcome to Volume 9 of Barrier Island's Bayside Book Chats. This is the Memorial Day edition. You might say, well, why is it past Memorial Day? Because in tradition, Memorial Day was May 30th, and it's only due to, I guess, modernization that we made it, the last Monday of the month and made a weekend out of it. So we're in between May 30th and the weekend we already had to celebrate as a nation Memorial Day. It used to be called Decoration Day, and on that day of the weekend, this past weekend, we usually do a show from my garden. Well, this has kind of become our garden here in the summertime as we spend more time here. But rather on Memorial Day and that weekend, rather than listening to me gab, I thought it would be better for a little quiet, a little solace in honor of those who have served. But we're going to continue our show inside. So we moved inside, and we're almost done talking about our back wall. But first, I got to go through my usual routine of, if you want to know what's going on and when our hours are open as we go into the summer here, especially with all the changes due to store openings in the state of New Jersey during the pandemic, follow us on Facebook. These are in no particular order this week, so we're just going to make it up as we go. We recycle, reuse, reread. We're a used bookstore. We're trying to keep good books alive. If you're done with them, come see us. We'll give you credit. If you can't get down here, we can always ship them to you. We appreciate all the love and support that you can give us. Thumbs up. Follow our great quotes and insights on Instagram. And for those of you who don't have Facebook, tell your friends to watch us on YouTube. So back wall, we're almost done talking about it. When we get to the last day that I do talk about it, we're going to talk about Anthony Hillman's mural that we have painted on the top. But for now, in terms of books, two sections that we have back here that I did not cover yet is we have these wonderful books from the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s of youth sports. My favorite sport, ice hockey. Someday we'll do a sports section. We'll talk about a famous baseball player from New Jersey that we had in here and a great story that occurred from that. We'll talk about maybe the Stone Harbor Squids, our local ice hockey team that I played for 20 years, and an author that a collector that I know that collects baseball books. A lot to talk about in sports, and hopefully we'll see sports soon. But anyway, teenage baseball stories and boys' life football stories. Another thing we have on the back wall is we do have a sci-fi section, which is right off of Parker's left shoulder. That's mostly hardback and larger paperbacks. In the back wall, I have a lot of the smaller ones. And, of course, we have Game of Thrones. We, of course, have talked about Tolkien, Dune Messiah, the Dune movie coming out later this summer. The Dune books, all of them are very hot. The first printing's going for multiple hundreds of dollars, and the paperbacks are getting harder to find. Isaac Asimov, Robert Jordan, Piers Anthony. Not only Ray Bradbury do the books we talked about in the last couple of weeks, but he also did some true science fiction, and Orson Scott Card. But this is the Memorial Day edition. We're going to step away from the back wall, and we're going to go over to the corner and have our book chat. So welcome to the corner for the Bayside Book Chat. And if you've followed the first 8 volumes, you have a pretty good understanding that presidential leadership is a big part of it, and primarily FDR's fireside chats as an inspiration. So I'm going to give you 2 quick quotes from FDR involving, Memorial Day, but which hadn't occurred yet, but military service and democracy and what this nation's trying to do and what the people who serve this nation are helping us achieve. So Franklin Delano Roosevelt, we must be the great arsenal of democracy. For us, this is an emergency as serious as war itself. We must apply ourselves to our task with the same resolution, the same sense of urgency the same spirit of patriotism, sacrifice, as we would show as if we were at war. And that's how I feel about this pandemic. I personally don't think we have attacked this hard enough, fast enough, sincere enough as a nation. And if we applied that quote to this pandemic, I feel we would be in a better situation. The next quote involves Pearl Harbor. FDR was getting us out of the Great Depression with these fireside chats, but he also helped us get through World War II. And this is probably one of FDR's most famous quotes. December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. No matter how long it may take us to overcome this premeditated invasion, the American people, in their righteous might, will win through to absolute victory. Being that it's Memorial Day, I really didn't spend any time looking for a wine quote, and I kind of think that would be maybe a touch distasteful. So we're going to save our wine for a toast at the end for those who have served, and there will not be a quote this week. So in the past couple editions, we've talked about some authors who, by writing books, tried to steer us away from war, possibly, or at least steer us away from leaders who might get us into war. And they weren't just making this up inside their sci-fi heads. All of them had experienced war and had seen the devastation from it and were trying to guide us away from it. We talked about how Tolkien had seen the devastation of war and what it did to nature. And then, of course, if you've seen the Tolkien movies, you see the trees come to fight in the war. That represented nature. And then, of course, the last two episodes, we talked about Bradbury and Orwell. And they had experienced war in the 20s, 30s, and 40s and were trying to guide us. Some American authors, though, who did serve in the military. Now, Memorial Day truly is for those who lost their lives, and I don't mean any disrespect to those that did. I'm trying to honor them. These authors did not pass away, but they could have, because they risked their lives and they all served in the U.S. military. Two of them, albeit, went on to write books that really were more anti-war, but sometimes that occurs from having seen it. Joseph Heller, who wrote Catch-22, served in the Army Air Corps and fought 60 combat missions. And of course, Catch-22 is one of the most known protest literature books ever written. Ernest Hemingway, for whom the bell tolls, not only visited a lot of war fronts, in fact, he visited 5 battlefronts in his life, but in one of them, he earned a Bronze Star serving the U.S. in World War II. Tim O'Brien was a Vietnam War veteran who wrote a very respected book on Vietnam called The Things They Carried, a very descriptive book on the Vietnam War. He was wounded twice. He was drafted right out of college. J.D. Salinger, Catcher in the Rye, drafted 1942, had 6 chapters of the beginnings of the book of the Catcher in the Rye in his jacket as he landed on Utah Beach during D-Day. Kurt Vonnegut, who wrote Slaughterhouse-Five, another anti-war book, was a prisoner of war during World War II. And Walt Whitman served not necessarily in battle, but he helped the wounded for 3 years. After he had heard his brother was wounded in the Battle of Fredericksburg, he went to find him, and after that dedicated the next 3 years of his life to helping wounded. And I did want to try and bear with me while I pull this up. I want to get to something about Vonnegut. So Vonnegut used his experiences as a prisoner of war in Dresden in World War II as the basis for his novel Slaughterhouse-Five. And he said in a 2002 interview with Fox News, "One of the great American tragedies is to have participated in a just war. It's been possible for politicians and movie makers to encourage us that we're always the good guys. The Second World War absolutely had to be fought. I wouldn't have missed it for the world. But we never talk about the people we kill. This is never spoken of." Kurt Vonnegut. And next, I'm going to pull out a pile of books that are military based and would be great reading as a memorial to those that served in our U.S. military. So this isn't all that we have. We have a very, very large U.S. history and military section. We have a sign above it. Military vets, if they announce themselves when they come in, always get a discount here. And on holidays, Memorial Day, July 4th, Veterans Day, we try to bump that up a little bit. So if you're a veteran, come see us. If you're a history buff, come see us. This is a handful out the multitudes of books that we have. Stephen Ambrose's, who wrote Band of Brothers, Citizen Soldiers. The aforementioned Kurt Vonnegut Jr., Slaughterhouse-Five. Helmet for My Pillow, one of the most requested books that I have of personal authors' experiences in the military. Flags of Our Fathers became a Clint Eastwood movie written by James Bradley. Back to Ambrose. D-Day. Enough said. And a very acclaimed book, Laura Hildenbrand's, the author of Seabiscuit, wrote a book of World War II survival called Unbroken. So some personal thoughts. Previously, I've kind of called it like, thoughts from 10,000 feet. I did not serve. A lot of people in my family's history, have. Something that's thought today, and it's kind of why I wore this shirt, is, war is one thing, and Vonnegut, of course, talked about it in that quote that I just read. But really, we're always trying to steer ourselves away from war, and as a final, last resort. And that's what Orwell and Bradbury were, again, speaking to us. Get educated. An educated populace leads to a good democracy. A good democracy in diplomatic approaches around the world might prevent us from wars. It is, autocrats and combinations of flag rally and nationalism, sometimes religion mixed in, combined with a overzealous leader that can get a lot of people killed real quick, a la Hitler, the Emperor of Japan from World War II, just as examples. So coexist can go a long way to maybe as a mindset to toning things down so that we don't reach those flashpoints, like, one trigger that shot off, whether it was the Revolutionary War, they talk about the first shot fired around the world, whether it was World War I and the first shots fired there quickly led to a larger scale war. The other part of it is, it's in history, glorification of war, going back to the Roman times. If you've watched some of the documentaries that my daughter Parker and I have watched of the Revolutionary War, the brightness of the uniforms, it was about, I wouldn't call it showing off, but showing nobility, I guess, would be in it. You wanted to show your uniform and show you were a soldier, and it was an honor to join the military and travel the world and get into conflicts. That's what a man did. Maybe great for your own military career, but maybe not so great for civilians and people around the world during a time of colonialism. Another thing that's brought to my mind is, again, to the coexist part, is, I'm more of a pacifist than not. And again, I'm explaining why. Going to try to prevent war with a pacifist mindset. It doesn't mean that wars don't have to be fought. There's been a lot of noble wars fought. Which leads me to something that's always bothered me for a long time, and it's the swift boating of John Kerry. At one point, a group of military veterans took an affront to John Kerry, and it probably stems back to when he came back from the Vietnam War and protested against it. And they pretty much claimed that the awards that were given to John Kerry, which include the Silver Star, the Bronze Star, the Purple Heart, and the Action Ribbon, maybe he wasn't worthy of, that maybe he had fudged his report and wasn't all deserving. It later came out that more so than not, he was deserving. And I just never really appreciated that mindset of people, in fact, it became such a term that you can look it up on Wikipedia, and it just has become a term that means when you improperly accuse a political opponent of yours of something, it's called swift boating. At that same time, John Kerry had served, and he had been under fire. And when he came back and protested against the war, it ends up in time that maybe he was more right than not there as well. I know some people who served are going to be very upset by that, and they have a right to be in their own minds. I'm not trying to upset them. I never served. It's an observation and a student of history. Another thing that bothered me with that is during that time, he was in an election against George Bush Jr. And so here you had a guy that the group of people who were against John Kerry were for George Bush Jr., who, even though he was a commissioned officer, he never saw combat and was basically, having cocktails at a USO office, officers club, during that time. So putting aside my personal views, the gentlemen and women who have fought in the armed services of America have always fought for our rights of freedom and democracy. And that includes having many viewpoints, including the viewpoint that I just shared. People have an opposing viewpoint, they're allowed to have that. That's what they fought for. There are a lot of people out there who have different viewpoints than I do. I've run into many of them doing retail during this latest pandemic. And some of the things that I've come across I'll share in future episodes and really bother me. But it all comes down to opinions and rights. And everybody can have them and have their own. And that is what was fought for by many service people. And I respect that. And in this edition, we're memorializing that. I'm sure you all have family and friends who have fought, and many of them have given their lives for service to this country. I would like to share with you some of the folks in my family. My wife's uncle Gary Bevan served in Vietnam. My father's sister, my Aunt Jo Langle, served as a U.S. Army Vietnam nurse. My father-in-law, Bob Bevan, served during the Cold War station in Germany in the U.S. Army. My grandfather earned a Purple Heart in World War II. And I'm going to slide away for just a quick thought on that, being that the Memorial Day, people fought for people to have a viewpoint. My viewpoint is something that's bothered me, is that my grandfather went and served and earned a Purple Heart. Trump says he wanted one. Well, he had his chance. He deferred to a bone spur. He does not know more than the generals, and he really should never again insult Gold Star families. Trump aside, I had 6 members who fought in the Civil War, which was known as the Teachers Regiment. And going all the way back to the Revolutionary War, on my mother's side, the brother of the signer of the Declaration of Independence, Stephen Hopkins' brother, Esek Hopkins, was the first person put in charge of the Continental Navy. This is written about in local author Tim McGrath's book, Give Me a Fast Ship. And oddly enough, it is my relative on my father's side of the family who was the first Treasurer of the United States before Hamilton, and he personally funded, to the point of near bankruptcy, using his own money to fund the beginnings of the Revolutionary War. So although I did not serve, I respect and honor all those, and I give homage and memorialize my own family members, even though we were fortunate enough to my knowledge, that any of them had been killed in combat. Which leads us to a toast. Where is my glass? So, to all the servicemen and women of the U.S. military who have given their lives for us. So this week we passed on the PBS books and we did the Memorial Day books instead, but we will get back to that. I believe we are going to be ready for book number 61 of the PBS Great American Read. Last week we passed on trivia because I wasn't ready, but this week we're prepared. So the answers to Volume 7's trivia questions, and again, for those of you who are catching on late and don't know, send me your answers through Facebook. You are eligible for $25 for first place, $5 for entries, in-store credit. Question 1 of Volume 7 was, what author wrote some writings that the movie Blade Runner was based on. That was Philip Dick. The actor, an American actor that was in Blade Runner, the lead character was Harrison Ford. Road Warrior, the actor who played the first several series movies of that was Mel Gibson. What dystopian country was the Road Warrior series set in? That's Australia. The later edition that I showed the clips of with the flame flowing guitar, what actress starred in Fury Road? That was Charlize Theron. The IQ Society was Mensa. The largest library was the Library of Congress. The oldest U.S. college, founded in 1636, was Harvard. The British actors, the question was what Bradbury, H.G. Wells, Huxley, and Orwell, what country did they hail from? They were all British. And since we were talking about dystopian novels, what's the opposite of that? What's the opposite of craziness and disorder? What is a wonderful society? That would be a utopia. This week we only have 7 questions, and they relate to Memorial Day. What was the original name of Memorial Day? It was a different day. What was its name? Who is credited with starting the holiday? What date was chosen as the original day to celebrate Memorial Day? It used to be an actual day, not a flip-floppy day that we fit into our weekend off. What year did it become an official federal holiday? What flower is worn on Memorial Day? Maybe you've seen it in parades. What is the name of the graveyard near Washington, D.C. that the presidents will visit? And when they visit there and they give their salute, what is the very unique situation there that they are paying homage to? And again, that is a tribute to all those that have served. That is the end of Volume 9. Coming up, we're going to return back to the PBS, and we're going to return to things that we can do to enlighten us and enjoy us as we go through this pandemic. And next week, we're going to talk about hobbies. We have a lot of books on hobbies in this store, and that'll be in Volume 10.